Shudhivindo, Assalamu alaikum. Dear viewers, we are back after a little pause. In the meantime, we couldn't really conduct our online dialogue for a few weeks. Anyway, সবাইকে বিজয়ের এই মাসের শুভেচ্ছা জানাচ্ছি এবং আজকে একটু ভিন্ন ধর্মী প্রোগ্রাম দিয়ে আমরা আমাদের আজকের প্রোগ্রামটি এই সপ্তাহের আলোচনা শুরু করছি। এই সপ্তাহে আমরা ধারাবাহিকভাবে will try to discuss a series of continuous series of discussion on this pesticide and agroecology issue. Today, this is the first program, but we are expecting that there will be another 3 program in this week to discuss on this issue. In solidarity with the No Pesticide Week, the PAN is observing this No Pesticide Week from 3rd December to 10th December. So in solidarity with that, the BSAFE Foundation is organizing this series of discussion. And today we have 2 very special guests with us to discuss on that issue. Let me introduce our guest with you. First of all, let me introduce Sarojini Rangam. She is the Executive Director of PAN-AP, which is stands for Pesticide Action Network Asia Pacific. And this PAN is basically a movement on agroecology, food security, food sovereignty rather, not food security, food sovereignty, and prevent this pesticide poisoning of children, women, and men. That is very key focus of that PAN, Asia Pacific. And with us, we also have Dr. Nitish Devnet, who is a very legendary academic and scientist in our country. We know, all of us know him very well. He is a pioneer for many things, but today we also like to introduce him as a pioneer for this One Health movement. Sir, should we call it movement or it is a program only? It is a movement.
Well, it is a movement. It is a program. You can mention anything like that.
We'll have to call it movement. Then the government is on board.
It is also a movement. We will talk about it.
Thank you very much. Dear viewers, we'll continue today's discussion in English, but we'll definitely come up with a kind of summary in Bangla. Later we can share with you who really need a Bangla script or Bangla translation for this. But I hope that most of our viewers are very much well understanding of English as well. Anyway, let me start this program with Dr. Nitish Devnet, sir. Sir, as I mentioned that you were a pioneer of this One Health program or movement in Bangladesh, and which is very much consistent with this global health agenda as well. So I would be very happy that if you briefly could let us know the synergy of this global health agenda and the One Health program issue, the objectives, to understand for our viewers to understand it more easily about it. If you could explain it a bit.
Thank you very much, and also many thanks to you for introducing me to the participants, audience, and giving some kind words for me. And also, it is a great pleasure to be with you, as well as Sarojini. And the topic that Sarojini is covering is also very linked with our One Health. Let me first tell you one important thing today. It is specifically in this week, FAO, WHO, OIE, and United Nations Environmental Program jointly released a statement just on Thursday. And that joint statement is about a new definition of One Health. And if I would like to take the opportunity, normally we know One Health is a concept based on understanding of the interdependence and interconnectedness of human health, animal health, and environmental health. That is the basic understanding. Then many people, have given different definitions. Now, I think it is a understanding or realization among many proponents of One Health that a sort of, harmonized definition is necessary. And that definition is basically prepared by a group of people, what we call OLEP, One Health High Level Expert Panel. Very recently, WHO recruited 26 experts from groups. And I'm one of the members of that team. And that is, a proposal prepared by them, and it has been shared with all these agencies. And then finally, it has been endorsed by them. And that definition, what they say, just I would like to mention to you that One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystem. It recognizes the health of humans, domestic and wild animals, plants, and the wider environment, including ecosystems, are closely linked and interdependent. The approach mobilizes multiple sectors, disciplines, and communities at very varying levels of society to work together to foster well-being and tackle threats to health and ecosystem while addressing the collective need for clean water, energy, air, safe, and nutritious food, taking action on climate change and contributing to sustainable development. So this is a definition, is a very new definition that has come. Now you understand very clearly that it is a very broad-based concept, and it started at the beginning of this century. One Health, as a approach is not very new, but it is a new world, and at the new circumstance, it is becoming more and more important. And that importance has been realized even stronger with the present situation of COVID-19 and the interlink of COVID virus, this what we call SARS coronavirus type 2 and the human health or pandemic. These are all very interlinked issues, and it is now important agenda, not for only UN agencies. You might have heard that in G20 Forum, G7 Forum, and World Food Summit Forum, even the latest, the Climate Summit Forum in Glasgow, they all recognize that a sort of broad-based approach is important to tackle the current crisis that the world is facing. So this is a background of One Health. It started in 2004 in a conference with Rockefeller University, and they call it, it was a sort of gathering of environmental people, conservators, human health, animal health, all people together, a scientific community, and gave a voice that one world, one health. This is a one world, and it needs a One Health approach. So you can understand that it is a unifying approach, an integrated approach. So this is a background of One Health. And more importantly, when you think about, our food system, say for example, that you are dealing with the food system. And the food system with an appropriate approach, as well as considering all the safety issues, our agriculture intensification, no matter where it is held, it is plant or animal, you need to really consider our ecosystem's health in a very judicious way. Otherwise, your indiscriminate, pressure on these ecosystems will create a sort of, challenge or danger, and that we may not be able to handle uh, in the future. And there are a lot of issues already. Is very serious issues that world is struggling with, and for that reason, a sort of collaborative effort is very essential. We foresee collaboration, coordination, communication, and capacity building. In the context of this collaborative approach is One Health. So this is a One Health background. And in Bangladesh, we started this movement in 2008 in a One Health conference organized by Chittagong Veterinary and Animal Science University in collaboration with many stakeholders, including the government. And that is how we started this movement. And it has been continuing. Initially, it was a platform of civil society people. And right at the very beginning, what you said, Mr. Shab, that whether it is a movement or it is a program, it is also a movement because we set two goals during that time in the 2008 conference, that we have two goals to make One Health functional. One, a whole of a society movement, and then whole of a government approach. So we are working in that way. And for that thing, the point that you have made right at the very beginning, that when we talk about the food safety, when you talk about the ecosystem, we use the natural resources for our food production. And if we cannot really maintain the system in a proper way, abuse that system, just for the purpose of increasing production, without taking care of our ecosystem, then we will be entering into a irreversible, pathway, and that will really threat not only our health, it will threat our survival. So I'll stop here with the last word that One Health is basically a collaborative approach to save this planet, including, as I mentioned in my definition, the new definition. It's a very broad base now, and we can work in that umbrella in very many ways. Over.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, very concisely, you actually explain us and for our understanding about this One Health movement issues. We'll be glad if you could also share this new definition with us into the chat box or somewhere so that people will get more understanding of it. Let's move to this other movement, to Sarojini. Sarojini, the PAN is observing this no pesticide week for from 3rd December to 10th December. And recently, we also celebrate this or observe, rather we can say, observe the campaign on against the poisoning of children, like agroecology for our children's future. With that title, we observe the campaign recently. So, just if in brief, let us explain why we need this kind of campaign, and why agroecology is so important movement at this point of time.
Thank you, Moshe, for the question. We have been doing this protect our children from toxic pesticides for the last few years now. And one of the reasons we decided to have this campaign, because November 20th is also the Global Children's Day. And so we wanted to recognize that and have actions and activities around those dates to create public awareness. Because if you look at Asia and globally, we are an agrarian society. We are based in the rural areas. Most of our communities, we have been working in agriculture. And if you look at the UNICEF figures now, 108 million children are in the rural areas working in agriculture. 108 million. And these are the children who are exposed to pesticides all the time, because the reality is our farmers are spraying pesticides on all the crops. Even in the very much rural areas, we are seeing spraying of pesticides, highly hazardous pesticides. And now our children are being exposed. And children are like 4 to 5 times more, they absorb more if you compare that with adults. And that's from the WHO, that the absorption of pesticides are so high compared to adults. So that's one major reason why we thought we have to, have this campaign. The second is what a lot of the studies that is being done to understand the impact of pesticides on children, they are finding that if you compare children exposed to children who are not so exposed, so urban and rural, they're finding that the level of intelligence and their health is being impacted. When you talk about intelligence, there was one study that was a bit shocking, where they had this children drawing figures. They were like 5-year-old, and they were drawing figures of humans. And the children who were exposed in the rural areas where lots of pesticides were being used, they couldn't draw a proper figure compared to the children who were not so exposed, or were in the urban area where pesticides was not being used. They could draw figures that looked like humans. So immediately there was all these difficulties of cognitive and behavioral as well as intelligence. And they said that the studies are showing the drop in health and the impact on intelligence of our children. And therefore, we said we have to do something about this. We cannot allow our children to be exposed and impacted in terms of pesticides. And therefore, we have this whole push towards better understanding of the impact of pesticides on our children. And therefore, to avoid this impacts, we have now, kind of promoting agroecology, where we are saying we don't need food that is laced with pesticides. It's not just pesticide residues, but also when children are in the rural areas, they are exposed. So we're saying let's move towards agroecology, where you work with nature, you work with the environment, and you work with knowledge of the farmers' wisdom, and with new scientific methods and practices, so that you combine both to come out with practices that are really agroecologically based, as well as and it's safety for human health, for humans and the environment. So that's what we are doing right now, Moshe. So November 20th, we start that. December 3 is the No Pesticide Use Week, where, if you remember, December 3, it was when Bhopal took place, the catastrophe, the tragedy where, thousands of people were poisoned. So we wanted to recognize that we don't need this kind of tragedy, this kind of poisoning, and we don't need this silent pandemic, So December 3 is a time where we kind of look at no pesticide use. And then we extended it to the whole week until December 10th.
Thank you, Saro. But it is, I mean, I believe that it is not only this 108 million children are working in agriculture, but rather all the children in the community where the pesticide are used, they are exposed in different ways. Those who are playing in the crop field, or the lactant mothers, or whatever. I think sometimes in the third world country, the children are used to mix up these chemicals, bring the chemicals with their parents. I mean, they are. I mean, most of the children are really exposed to that. But Saro, it is said that to feed this growing population, we need to depend on this GM and pesticide or agrochemicals, whatever it is. How do you really defend that kind of myth?
Well, if you really look at this has been an argument from the beginning when pesticides were created. And if you look at who is profiting from these pesticides, it's basically for big companies. They are Syngenta, they are BSAFE, Bayer, and Corteva, which Corteva is the the merger of DuPont and Dow. So they've created Corteva. So basically, they control 80%.
Now there is CropLife as well. CropLife is there as well, isn't it?
No, CropLife is the association. They all belong to an association. And CropLife is not the industry, but they are industry association. So these are the four that control 80% of the pesticide production and market. So they are the ones that are making, the profits, not the farmers, not us who are being, subjected to all this pesticide exposure, impacts, cancers, immune system aspects. So this is really a very good PR and of the industry, that you can't have food, you can't feed the world without pesticides. But that's really not true. If you look at even if you look at the statistics from FAO, they're saying that there is enough production to feed the world, even more than that. But what we are seeing is that it's a question of distribution. In fact, it's ironic because the farmers who produce the food are the ones who are in poverty and can't, feed themselves. And so it's a combination of policies that are not very farmer friendly. You go into monoculture, so you're thinking of export crops, and so you have, like Malaysia, you have thousands of hectares of oil palm plantation, which is all for export, not to feed the people. So so if you look at the situation of agroecology, you don't measure each crop and say, okay, it's not meeting, the yields are not enough, whatever. You look at the yields of the whole farm, which is so diverse, because you have vegetables, you have the rice, you have the herbs, you have chickens running around, you have in South Asia, it's more cows and goats. So you have this very mixed cropping, both in terms of crops and animals. You have all that combination, which is really a situation where you can feed not only the farmer and his family, but also in terms of the community. And of course, the women farmers, amazing work that is happening all over Asia in terms of agroecology. They're moving towards agroecology, feeding the communities in a very healthy and safe way. And that's safe food, as you said, be safe. And safe food is one of the most important aspects of this. So, yeah, there's no question that you can feed the world with agroecology.
Thank you. Dr. Nitish sir, I mean, you are very much involved in this pesticide residue effect on human and animal as well. So would you kindly let us know briefly that what is the status right now, this pesticide residue issues, I mean, how serious it is for us to consider?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this is an integral part of One Health approach because you need to protect the environment and indiscriminate use of this sort of chemicals like pesticides will certainly affect not only our health or only human health, it will also affect the natural phenomena, all plants, and that plants being eaten by animal as well as human being. It is basically a chain, a food chain, and basically you are really, threatening the health and health of not only human, it is also threatening the health of the environment and their fauna, those who are living within this environment as a sort of coexistence. So I fully agree with Sarojini what she said, that pesticide uses in the agriculture is not the solution, and it does affect not only human health, as I say, it affects the human health, of course. And she nicely mentioned about the, the cognitive ability of the children and how it affects the mother, as well as in general, it is a big public health agenda. But as I said, does not stand alone. It is also linked with other life, other species, who are really coexisting within this ecosystem. It affects animal, no matter whether it is wildlife or the domesticated. It affects the plant as a whole. And that is why we need to take a very strong stand in this thing. Let me tell you one thing, the use and abuse of these sort of things. One good example, about the antibiotics, for example, in our world. And we also tell the antimicrobial resistance. When you use this pesticide, what do you mean? That you are basically targeting what you said that you target to kill all the pests, like insect, also fungi, and all of these things. So we call it all the antimicrobials. The small microbes that you want to kill in a not in a judicious way, in an indiscriminate way, you basically really push the way they are surviving to survive even a better way. And that's what you call the resistance. They grow as sort of a resistance against any antimicrobials, including those sort of pesticides or other, germicide that you use either for agricultural purpose or for other purposes. And what is happening now at the present time, the antibiotic that was invented, it was the greatest, opportunity for modern medicine. The modern medicine is based on antibiotics. Now, antibiotic is going to be in a stage whereby a lot of microbes are resistant to available antibiotics. Why? Alexander Fleming, when he invented that one, in his Nobel Prize, lecture, he mentioned this thing, and he cautioned it that if you cannot carefully use this antibiotic, they will develop resistance, and it will be challenging, the most challenging issue for you. So it is not only antibiotic or bacteria; it is also other, beyond bacteria, other parasite, virus, fungus, all those things, whether it is in agriculture or in domestic animals or in a human health. So you have to be very judicious. As a result, now we are facing a silent pandemic, what we call a silent pandemic, that resistance against microbes because of overuse, underuse, indiscriminate use, no matter who is using it. And of course, what Sarojini said, there is a business there, there are multinational corporations there who really promotes to really market it, but don't consider the health. And not only health of the human, they don't consider about the health of the nature or ecosystem. And that is why our ecosystem is now threatened. A lot of extinctions of the species, including plant, animal. And that is why we are living in a sort of time when we have to be very strong in this voice that indiscriminate use of chemicals, no matter whether this is pesticide or other chemicals. If you cannot be judicious, unnecessary use, she has rightly mentioned, these are all unnecessary. For agricultural productivity growth, irrespective of plant or animal agriculture, these are not essential. And that is why we say.
And in COVID period, we found that most of the antibiotics are unnecessarily used. I mean, recently,
The study you have seen, it has been published there that 80% of the antibiotic used, it is a study undertaken by doctors. And they said it, 80% of the antibiotic used in COVID patients are unnecessary. No need. Antibiotic act only against bacteria, not against virus.
And dangerously, almost more than 70% antibiotic have a resistance already.
Resistance already. And those who are coming in the pipeline, even if you use them, you are not sure that whether you will remain safe. So it is a time of utmost consciousness about as a whole health system. And health system cannot stand alone. It is interdependent on agricultural practice, interdependent on maintaining the ecosystem, interdependent on the water resource, air altogether. And that is how you can keep safe human, our environment, and our animal population. That is why you say this is a time of integrated approach. There is no alternative. Our survival is dependent. Why the climate change is at this stage at the moment? We have created this thing. This is an anthropogenic, outcome of our nature today. So it is the highest time, I would not say high time. And that is why our boys got to be stronger. And a country like Bangladesh, say, for example, where we are dependent on our nature, so much so, if we do not take care now, our existence will be really threatened. I hope I answered to your question.
Thank you, sir. Definitely. Actually, I have I had an intention to really bring you two people together to have a cross interaction, because Saro is very focusedly talked about the pesticide and you are talking much focus about the antibiotics. I think that now it is a time to really, we need to have an integrated kind of approach together. Because in PAN, we should also talk about the antibiotics, because our fisheries sector, they are using a lot of antibiotics. The livestock department are using a lot of antibiotics. Even now in the plant, they are talking about a lot of, kind of what they call it, not antibiotic, but growth hormone and all other things.
They use fungicide, they use a lot of fungicide. And fungus, they are becoming resistant. And those resistant fungus, not only affecting, the animal, it is affecting the human. As you can see, how is it resistant? Nothing works.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Sarojini, for your kind information, Dr. Nitish Devnet is one of our famous agriculturists. Actually, he's a leader in the agriculture sector. So, and I know that you have a chemistry background. So, I think this discussion fits very well to this discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, Moshe. Just wanted to add to what Dr. Devnath has mentioned. The impact of pesticides also in terms of the environment is tremendous. Just to add to what you have said, Doctor, basically, it has caused environmental disruption. The bees, if you look at the neonicotinoids that are being used in agriculture, it's actually wiped out in many countries the bee population, which is very important as a beneficial, which is pollinator. Bees are necessary to pollinate 30% of our food crops, and without them, people were finding it so difficult, especially if you look at the phenomenon that happened in the US, in Europe. And in Europe, they tried to basically ban the neonicotinoids, and somehow the bees re-emerged because it managed to survive. But, in those countries like us, we are so not aware of what the impacts of these pesticides have on our bee population. And it's slowly disappearing. The wild bees are disappearing. You can see that even the beehives of the farmers, the bee farmers, is also being affected. Then you have bird populations basically that have disappeared. 20 to 25% of bird population has decreased. You have the 75% of flying insects are missing in Germany. This was a study that came out a few years ago, and it's like 75% of flying insects are missing. It's wiped out, such a biodiversity of organisms, environmental, that are very important. And soils, or as you were saying, the soil organisms are also being affected. And you talked about antibiotic resistance. There's also pest resistance to insecticides and pesticides as a whole. And so they are becoming superbugs and super, pests. And you can't control it any longer because they are so powerful because they have built resistance. And when you kill off their predators, their natural predators, they come out, in a resurgence, in a huge, the pest population just explodes. And that's why you have some of these kinds of pest attacks that, then you spray more pesticides and it creates more pest resurgence and pest resistance. And it's a cycle. You can never get over that kind of cycle. So I think you basically, I completely agree with you in terms of all these impacts on the environment, and overall also the impact on climate change. Because with climate change, we have, as you said, it's the highest priority. And we are seeing that the industrial agriculture is contributing almost 30% for in terms of the greenhouse gases emissions. And we need to bring that down. That's why for us, we are committed to promoting agroecology, because we feel that even in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of in the soils, because agroecology has that potential. It has diversity, it builds on biodiversity, it builds on the soil fertility, it builds stronger crops, and so I think that is the way forward in terms of adaptation to and mitigation in terms of climate change. I think for us, that's why for us that agroecology for our children, for our children's future, is really a priority.
Thanks.
Without it, I think we will, as you said, we will disappear.
Thanks, Saro, for the supplements. Dr. Nitish, I also interested to know that listening to all this discussion, I mean, you are mentioning very clearly that this pesticide is have a greater importance in this One Health movement kind of things. But could you let us know that how do you see that this pesticide could take more important place in this movement? I mean, I don't know whether it is already included in this 12 agenda or something like that, global health agenda, whatever
It is
you are.
in the global health agenda, it is an important place. If you see this definition that I just mentioned at the very beginning, plant is one thing, and secondly, what Sarojini is repeatedly mentioning, a set of, ecosystem, whether it is an agro ecosystem or as another systems. Ecosystem is a very integrated, interdependent, interconnected matter. And for that reason, it is in the heart of our One Health movement. Number one, basically, there is some weakness at the very beginning. While we talk about One Health, people used to think that, it is only the microorganism like virus or bacteria coming from animal to human, which is a very, traditionally known. We know that there are almost, 60% of the pathogens originated in animal coming to human being. And that is why we call the zoonosis. And people, was bogged down very narrowly to that one. So that is why it expanded to include the environment, ecosystem, that this voice is not reaching out in a proper way. That is why, at the beginning of this century, very highly foresighted people included in this deed that it is not only between animal and human. Environment is a fundamental one. You cannot exclude it. It has to be inclusive with this one. And when you talk about the environment, and it means it includes the natural resources, including the plant species. Even what she said, insects. There are very beneficial insects that we depend on for our food, for our survival, and we don't take care of them. If you do not, rather, you are destroying them. Bees are so important, and you are using them to kill them. And the pollinizations and other things, how it will affect the agricultural production. So that is why it is in the heart of these things. And we developed a strategy of One Health strategic framework in 2012. It was given less emphasis on this area, pesticide and other things. People understanding were still, though we are talking about One Health, they were not broad enough to include the environment. Now, in 2017, we revised that document and said, no, agriculture, particularly those sort of chemicals that we are using to destroy our environment, we need to really take care. Otherwise, it will not only be a partial, we will not really solve the health problems that we are talking about. So yes, the answer is very clear. It is One Health movement includes this area, not in an ordinary way, as a strong component. And before I conclude to answer this question, there are 5 principles for One Health. One is the equity of the different sectors and the disciplines. Then parity, the human population, no matter whether they are in the most periphery or in the urban, wherever, you need to emphasize on the parity. Third, the equilibrium, the balance of the ecosystem, human, animal, plant, and all others. Fourth, stewardship, responsibility you have to take, from all corners of people as a responsible, stewardship for that one. And finally, the 5th one is the transdisciplinarity. It is a science not only for one discipline, because it is a complex problem, and you alone, either agriculture or human health or animal health or an environmentalist, cannot solve the problem. if they cannot work together, even if it is a science. And science got to be dependent on transdisciplinarity approach. So that is why I think it is very clear that yes, pesticides use, or abuse, or protecting the plant and not using these things is a part of One Health movement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Saro, I know that this issue sometimes we also depends on UN role in our actions sometimes. And now you are on a campaign against FAO's partnership with Crop Life. In the one hand, FAO is talking about family farming, all these things, but on the other hand, they are having partnership with Crop Life. How do you see this dilemma?
Yeah, I think there's a conflict of interest issue here, because if you look at crop life, it represents the all the big transnational corporations that are producing pesticides, and these are almost like highly hazardous pesticides. Almost 40% of their production is in highly hazardous pesticides. And we know that these are violations of human rights, because it affects our lives, our health, and people have actually died. If you look at some of the in 2017, almost 100 farmers were exposed to these pesticides. 51 have now have a chronic effects, and this happened in India in Yavatmal. So it's not nothing. It's happening even now. It's not in the past. And these are pesticides produced by these transnational corporations. And now we have the CropLife, who represents them as an association, having an alliance with the UN Food and Agriculture, which is a real conflict of interest. And they are there and having all sorts of discussions and involved in meetings that potentially will move more pesticides and more. You create a PR that shows, all these crop life corporations are doing good, and we need to support them, we need them. And it's really a bad for us. We see it's a toxic alliance between FAO and crop life, and so we think it should be stopped. You can have other ways of engagement, not a formal alliance that you sign an agreement, and then of course FAO says no, they're only involved in a few things here and there, but it doesn't. It really looks as if there is a major conflict of interest, especially as you are the agency that is responsible for food and agriculture at the global level. And you're a UN, you're an intergovernmental organization. You can't have this kind of alliance with a association that is selling pesticides, that's killing people and poisoning children and poisoning the environment. How can you do that? It doesn't make sense.
Thank you. I think in some webinar, you and me was there, and we raised this issue to the special rapporteur of UN, and he on record promised that he will raise this issue in UN and also in his report. We may follow up that matters, because we have this on record promise from the UN rapporteur.
And to yesterday, actually, we had around 187,000 signatures, people who have signed on to say stop this toxic alliance of FAO and CropLife, and this was handed over to the FAO yesterday with a lot of activities at the global level. Even scientists have written to FAO, even funding agencies have written to FAO, and yet they continue to ignore that. And we are a bit concerned. Why is this happening at this point? And the special rapporteur, the human rights special rapporteur, he did come out with a paper on conflict of interest, which kind of fits in with what we are talking now in terms of FAO and crop life. So he has brought it from that perspective in terms of what do you call that, conflict of interest overall.
Nitish sir, I don't know whether we should call the dilemma or this kind of conflict of interest in our country, because the way I see it, that the government is very eager to ensure food safety for all our citizens. And this government already established this food safety authority and all other regulatory mechanism to ensure that things. But on the other hand, we are really not regulating our misuse or unjudiciary use of pesticide or new pesticide, illegal pesticide use in our country. So how do you see the balance? How to really go about it in future to really ensure that government hasn't for food safety for everyone?
No, very relevant question. And also, as at the very beginning, I mentioned to you that, these practices evolved over a time with a very attractive slogan that, Green Revolution and other things. And people really didn't care about what is going to happen or what impact it is going to have on the environment, on the species. Never, it is not only human species, but other species that are so beneficial for our survival. And they didn't really consider that much in a serious way. Now, these are all very visible, as Sarojini Rangam mentioned, in a very scientific way. How is it impacting the use of so-called dirty poison, these pesticides and other things on our next generation. And this is a sort of environment is now being created with the voice of these movements. It is not only one movement, it's a various movement, but it is very interlinked and also very interdependent. And for that thing, if you remember, in Bangladesh, we didn't have a food safety authority even a few years ago. Why is it coming up? Because of the voice of the consumers. They can see how is it impacting our health. Are we really safe? If you can give a proper voice, look at this use of, so-called, in the fruit and vegetables. There are some, chemicals people used to use. Now it has gone down to, even very minimum. Why? Because it is not only the government. Government, you have to remember, all politicians, it is not in Bangladesh. It is a generic character of the politicians. They see today. They do not want to see tomorrow because they need votes for today. They want to be in the power today and not for tomorrow. And that is what is the character of the politicians. So it is now the voice that we want to give from the society as a whole, that look, this is not what we really want. A stringent control is necessary. And it cannot be done only by rules, regulation, and act. There are a lot of rules, regulation, act, but it does not work. Why? Because the society as such is not really primed to that issue. So I think what you are doing now, we have to do in many fronts, those sort of movement, social movement. That's what I, at the very beginning, mentioned. The One Health is the whole of the society movement. And you engage all the communities, different level of people from different tiers, so that really, they got to listen to you. You have to make them to listen to you. And then you can really save our population. And there are good examples within our society that we were successful in stopping those things with the help of the government. Even sometimes you challenge the government, they really challenge you, but at the end they have bow down. So I think in this thing as well, let us come together, make a very strong voice. So this is not for agriculture. This is not for good food production. It is rather really impacting our health. It is destroying our next generation. We cannot allow.
Would you let us know that what is the space or scope of the civil society like BSAFE or the regional body like PAN or the organization I am working with to really be on board of this campaign, this movement?
Yes, I am also one of the member of the BAPA, and I am also member of this thing. I am also in the One Health. We need to form alliance, a sort of bigger alliance on those issues. Then only you can really make it. You bring the consumers, you bring the activists, you use the scientific community. Science is, cannot be only in the hand of the scientist. It has to have a connection with the society, and it has to be a two-way channel. What I say, I cannot do something that science, cannot give my solution. So science is also really dependent on the demand of the society. So let us really make an alliance, give a strong voice. Bangladesh is a country where there are a lot of success stories because of the movement. And this sort of social movement can really make better. And there are very good examples in this country. In the developed world, look at that. Vaccines, they are available vaccines, they are not using it. Whereas in this country, you remember the EPI, expanded immunization program. It is the highest level of success in Bangladesh. There is no resistance. Why? People are ready to there. Strong motivation was there. It is not only doctors, NGOs, different foundations, organizations, all came together. Look, this is how we can save our children. Now it is one of the best examples in the eye of the global community. So for food safety, I think let's make a big alliance and promote this idea in a strong way. I will be successful. Over.
Yeah, I think in your write-up you mentioned very rightly that for ensuring food safety we need to also follow the One Health approach. Otherwise, we cannot achieve that. Well, exactly. I hope that under your leadership, BSAFE would be on board for more actions on this One Health things. Saro, thank you very much, Dr. Nitish, for your elaborate sharing. I mean, it really enrich our knowledge on these issues. Saro, can you just, we are very much end of this program. Just let us know that what is your action to make this agroecological movement more successful? I mean, to our new generation and to our policymakers. So what PANEP is planning to do in future? Saro, can you hear me? Saro, can you hear me? Saro, can you hear me? Maybe she is not.
Sarojini, you are muted. You are muted. You need to unmute. Sarojini, you are muted.
Okay. Maybe she is not listening. Well, dear viewers, thank you very much for being with us. We have very special guest today, two very special guests. We hope that we'll continue this discussion future as well. Maybe Saro is not listening us very well. Maybe the network is not very well, seems. But today we have a very clear understanding of these two different dimensions of our health issues. One is like this pesticide, I mean misuse of pesticide and the serious effect of this pesticide on our health, and as well as Dr. Nitish sir also explained that how anything like this antibiotic and other issues. Any chemicals, non-judicial use of any chemicals also can be very much hazardous for our health and can really take us to a place where with no return. I think we need to really have a very integrated approach to fight these concerns. Saru, can you hear me? Oh,
I think our connection lost.
Yeah. So I think today, I think it's a new era. We are opening up. It's a new Pandora box. I would say that we really need to probe this very much. And BSAFE is very much onto the agenda as we are talking about food safety. And without these issues addressing this pesticide, antibiotics, and the integral health issues, we cannot really ensure food safety, and we cannot really go about it, any safe food system kind of things. So with that note, let me see whether Saro is coming back or not. But first of all, I'm really grateful to Dr. Nitish sir for your schedule, for giving us time and in your busy schedule. And we hope that you will update us about your research in different time to time in our discussion, so that there would be more consciousness and more awareness about this kind of the non-judicial use of antibiotic, pesticide, and all these issues. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Yeah, we'll remain in touch. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that note, we'd like to close our discussion today. Viewers will come back to you again. See you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Saro, we already closed anyway. I would like to hear from you the very last words. Actually, how do you see this agroecology movement to popularize this agroecology movement to our new generation? What is the plan of action of PAN to make it more popular?
I think definitely the link to the youth sector is very important. And one of the things that we have started to do is looking at agroecology in the schools as part of curriculum. We have been able to work with some of the partners to have these agroecology studies introduced in schools, where they would do it as part of biology, as agriculture, as part of a learning process. And I think that's a very good starting point. And that's something that we are doing and thinking.
Maybe you can mention this FLS, this field learning site.
Yes, field learning sites also. So we have the International People's Agroecology Multiversity, where we have a series of field learning sites all over Asia, and we are trying to also build up globally different regions having these field learning sites, and getting more young people to be involved in these field learning sites. I think it's a learning process, and I think that's the good way to move forward.
Thank you, Saro, for your time, and we are very much enriched from your discussion that this pesticide use is. The pesticide issue is a very important issue for our life, for our health, for our children. And we, from Dr. Nitish discussion and your discussion, it is very much clear that we should have a integrated movement together to really make it humanly for the environment for us. We'll definitely share much of your thoughts in future. And I think, as I mentioned already, that this is a Pandora box. We just opening it up, and we need to really innovate a lot to really have more united action by the consumers, by the people, and that's how we can win the race. Thank you very much, Sarojini.
Thank you, Moshe, and thank you for